Have a quorum, so we'll kick off the meeting here at 3:05 PM. So call the meeting to order, the Transportation Policy Body, as we're known as the TPB, on Tuesday, July 10th. So we have a meeting agenda, welcome and call to order, but also just as welcome as we do any new people here. I do want to recognize Mike Tan, if you want to stand up. He's the Wichita Transit Authority Director. Is that right? Wichita Transit Authority. So anyway, he's the bus guy.
There we go. That's even better.
But Mike, you've spoke to some of us before, and Wampo, you know, part of our MPO duty is supporting transit. So we do have a part of that federal program is some MPO money that filters in for the transit. So anyway, we'd like to welcome you. You want to say anything? Or?
What I'm going to say is I'm very anxious to be here and enjoying learning how Wichita functions and how we can become part of that over Wichita Transit. It's very exciting, and the input from the public so far has been enforced. To see that live on the west side, which I guess that's big. So, I'm a west sider, so I guess if that means anything. So, but yeah, I'm very excited. Very anxious to get going.
He picked the right side of town.
Oh, yeah. Why is that? Mike was asking us, why is it that way? You saw him doing this. But Derby's good too, right? So, okay. So moving into we'll call it to order officially in regular business. So if we want to approve today's agenda or any adjustments to that, thank you, Bert.
Second.
Thank you. So it's been moved and seconded to approve today's agenda. Any questions? Being none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you. Next is the minutes. Hopefully you had a chance to, y'all received a copy of the minutes, and if you had a chance to review, and if you have any corrections or additions or comments.
My name spelled on page 3 is Clasen. And then also, on what I was looking at, it looks like the May minutes, some of them were included in the June, or am I just looking at them wrong? I mean, that was,
You know what? Well, that's,
no, I'm new, so I may, but I saw where he had signed something and it was part of the June minutes, and he wasn't here last month, Tom.
And I don't sign anything.
No, I don't
That
mean
would've
a
been
sign, it was a motion
Oh, a
made, I'm
motion,
sorry,
okay.
excuse me. But
maybe, did we have the wrong person on the motion? Which one was that? The good catch? Well, I see a motion by Kelly Arnold and second by Dan.
It's the top of page 3. Motion was made to remove PWP as a consideration for the 2019 tip.
Oh.
Jones motioned and wondering if we have the wrong minutes. These say April 10th, 2018.
that's what it appeared to me, but like I say, I didn't go back and look.
But didn't Troy make a motion to remove that out? Wasn't it, isn't that, Christian, the amount of money that we removed last year? Wasn't that done by Troy?
That made that.
That part, I didn't have any notes, so I don't know. But
I think that's, Bruce, I think you're right. I think Troy made the
I
motion.
made the motion.
So, very good catch. Thank you.
how
Spelling.
is that his name?
Well, I don't know. That's all right.
Sorry.
Okay, so any other corrections noted? Okay, we will entertain a motion to approve the minutes with the correction on the top of page 3 that it was Troy. Okay, thank you, Kelly. In a second. Dan, thank you. Okay. There's a motion and a second. Any other comments? Being none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, motion carries. And Tom Jones abstains for not being here. You should be here at more meetings, you know. Okay. Okay, director's report.
A brief update on the tip with, I think Kristen Zimmerman and Tricia Thomas will give a brief update on the Transportation Improvement Program.
Kristen?
Okay, thanks, Phil. Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just a quick update on where things stand with the, our TIP update and our Wampo funding cycle process that's taking place in parallel. I think at your last meeting, we shared that we'd received applications and we were going through the screening process. We've completed that and we're just ready to start the project selection process. So the committee is scheduled to meet 3 times. They'll start meeting, they'll have a couple meetings later this month and then wrap up their work in early August. So I wanted to share that information with you, and then the funding recommendation that comes out of that committee will be brought to this board for final consideration and action at your September meeting. So you'll see that shortly.
Who is the committee?
I'm sorry, what's that?
Who's on the committee?
Good question, thanks. Your chair has appointed a 5-member committee. There's one member from representing the board, and then there's 3 staff engineers on staff from some of our member jurisdictions, and then we've got 1 person. So as a change for this year, 1 person, a sort of a citizen representing the community and equity issues. So a 5-person committee.
Bruce, I'm representing the board.
Representing the board? Okay.
And then you got Paul Gunzelman, Phil, Chris Upchurch from staff, Jim Weber, Stevens, Annie, sorry.
And then the second item I just wanted to bring to your attention is that the public comment period for these candidates for WAMPO funding was opened late last month, late June, and it will be open through the end of July. We appreciate those of you that helped us to get the word out about that. We've already started receiving some comments. I've heard from some of your communities that they forwarded this on to your constituents and member groups and other sorts of groups you're working with. So definitely want to thank you for that. And at this time, I'm going to invite our communications manager, Tricia Thomas, up here, and she's going to do a quick run through of our public comment tool for this project. We thought you might want to check it out. It's new and really cool. We think it is, at least.
Yeah, we're
Thanks.
really excited about
Yes,
it.
Thank you.
Have any of you seen it yet? Did you click on the links and see our new Wampo Engagement Hub? You'll see that we've listed each of the projects has their own basic survey. So when you click on it, I'll just click on this one. It gives the project name, a small scope, the total cost, and the request, and then background, which Kristen kind of tried to write up based on information from all of you. And then we took some pictures and put a map in here so people could see what the projects were, and then put a comment. So we really didn't draft any specific questions. We just wanted to know what the community thought about these projects based on the information that you all gave us. And rather than do just one survey with all, we thought we would do them so that, you know, if someone lived in Valley Center and only wanted to answer the Valley Center questions, they could do that. And I can share this link with you, but this tool has a mayor mode. So this basically kind of summarizes all of the responses. Like you can see where the people live who are responding to the survey, who have answered so far. We can even target certain towns if we want to for people through social media. Like if they have their social media accounts and they say, I live in Andover, we can say, hey, answer these questions, residents of Andover. And this is just some of the top comments, so we've gotten a lot of them so far, considering normally we get 0. We're really excited. So if anybody's interested in having the link to the mayor mode and looking through what we've had so far, it looks like we've had over 200 visitors and 15 people respond. So we're excited.
Because traditionally, we have just a few comments in this public comment period, if any. So that's pretty good.
Sorry, it's a shameless plug for one of my projects, but we're working on the Human Services Transportation Plan update. So this is a plan for people with disabilities and older adults to identify what their needs are. I think I talked about it at a previous meeting, but this is the survey. We're just putting out the current goals and strategies and asking people, do these still make sense? So that's basically what that is. I'd encourage all of you to take that survey too. And Bethany could probably send out the mayor mode link to everybody if you guys are interested in seeing what the results are as we go. And I think this will close at the end of July. Is that what you said?
I think that'd be a good reminder to send that link to all of the policy body members that we
We'll
can share
send the
with our.
link to the hub and also to the mayor mode so you can see, you can add your response and also see what others are saying.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you. All right. Moving on to the consent agenda.
The only other thing I had,
Oh, I'm sorry.
Mr. Chair, was there is a pretty detailed update of the Planning Walkable Places grant program in your agenda packet. After you've looked that over, if you have any questions, be happy to try to answer those. There are 20 projects that are either under consideration or have just been awarded, or there's one, the selection is still pending for the consultant. But other than that, we seem to be moving ahead with that program, and it's going now in high gear.
Yeah, so it looks like what, about just over half of them been awarded?
Yes.
Any problems on any of the others, or is just going through the process?
Haven't found any problems to date, other than just getting the details into place. This is kind of the first time we've tried something like this. Yes, yes.
Recall that was from the walkable places that everybody submitted from the deobligated funds last year. So that's where we're at on that. Any questions about that? So, okay, moving on to the consent agenda. There are 3 items in the consent agenda. The Wichita Downtown Streets conceptual design is not included. The single audit is what we've talked about before. AGH is doing an audit, and then Mulvane and Derby have Mulvane's got a wayfinding signage plan, and Derby's got their walkable development plan.
Move we accept consent agenda as submitted.
Second.
Okay. Thanks, Bert. Thanks, Ann. It's been motioned and seconded. Is there any other comments or questions? Being none, all in favor of the motion, please indicate so, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay, officially, this is the time for public comment opportunities. Is anybody from the public? Please approach the podium and state your name and your social security number.
My name is Jane Burns. Some of you know me already as an advocate for walkability. I want to thank Wampo for its proactivity for planning walkable places, looking into the future and seeing the future and creating the future here. I know that Wampo encompasses far more than Wichita geographically, but I'm going to use the name James Chung, who told us that we needed lots more multimodal. In fact, he has on his website a video and an article from May of 2017 where he quoted Chris Lineberger, who is a developer, an urban developer, who said, you're lagging. There are lots of places that are eating your lunch, that Wichita needs to catch up in order to compete for young talent who are demanding a multimodal transportation system, a system that caters not just to cars, but bikes, pedestrians, and buses as well. The knowledge economy is in the ascendancy, and the knowledge economy is demanding walkable, urban places. So if you don't offer the market what it wants, and you're not going to be competitive. So this is humble Jane Burns quoting James Chung and Chris Lineberger and thanking you for doing the walkability, bikeability, transit, and even train. Pete, I took a long train trip with 2 grandsons. That's a conversation, and it was a good one. Thank you so much. I really appreciate this opportunity. It is intimidating, for citizens to stand up here and do this. So let me know if you have any questions. Thank you.
Jane, thanks for attending and for your comments. Okay, next is the item 4 is planning considerations, which we have none. So we'll move on to new business items. Wampo funding, year-end balance options. Seems like we just did this a few months ago.
This is kind of a different type of an option. We wanted to present to you today and get your opinion on whether you want to move forward with this. For the past couple of years, Wampo has been faced with the issue of dealing with non-obligated year-end balances. And last year, we had about $2.6 million, and most of that went to the planning walkable places. But we also started last year, or KDOT started a policy last year that they could no longer carry over year-end funds. And I was told to say that was local projects, not or transportation planning, who made that ruling. So Mr. Moriarty has nothing to do with that. And that the funds are not obligated with a certain time frame. Wampo runs the risk of losing those funds. Last year, the TPB voted to use approximately the $2.6 million to do planning walkable places, to do a technology-related project between Derby and K15, or Derby and Wichita and K15, and paying off a promised reimbursement early. The money was also later used to purchase a new bus for Wichita Transit. What we're asking you to consider today is what we're talking about is advanced construction type projects, and that would be basically in the form of reimbursements for projects that you would do as local communities. It's basically project is to let for construction and federal. For example, Wampo funding is split over multiple years. Example would be a total project cost of $1 million for a road project, and that's be scheduled to let in May of 2019. TIP programming would be $200,000 in local match, $300,000 for 2019 Wampo funding, and $500,000 for Wampo funding in future years. April 2019, the sponsoring jurisdiction, if project was selected, would pay the local match of $200,000 to KDOT. Sponsoring jurisdiction, again, if a project is selected, would pay future Wampo funding of $500,000 to KDOT. In May of 2019, the project would let and the contracts are awarded. In June of 2019 to December of 2019, the project is under construction. KDOT pays contractor invoices and KDOT requests federal funding reimbursement. In December 2020, KDOT would close out the project. And in 2021, KDOT reimburses the sponsoring jurisdiction future year Wampo funding of $500,000. The upside of this project would be that no federal funds are in jeopardy of being lost. If jurisdictions or issues short-term temporary notes to finance jurisdiction, or construction, I should say, reimbursement will pay off principal of the notes prior to debt service period. You would have small interest fees that would go along with this, but again, the notes don't account against your tax lid unless you just paid like cash or something like that. The downside is the jurisdiction upfronts a significant portion of the project cost and pays again interest on the temporary notes. We're also looking at some other current possibilities, and that could be to continue the Planning Walkable Places program, but you were pretty clear in the minutes that that was not one of the options that you favored unless there was year-end money that couldn't be used. We could pay out project reimbursements when feasible, and we've tried to do that this year, but we can't use all of the money for project reimbursements. We could continue to purchase transit rolling stock, buses, or we could pay the cost of technology and ITS projects. And there are a lot of those around that people would like to do, especially KDOT. Next steps, if the TPB wants to consider the advanced construction option, Wampo would arrange meetings with city managers of your community or city clerks or finance staffs or all of staffs and member communities. And we'll also work with KDOT, FHWA, and FTA to try to determine other available options. Be happy to answer any questions, and if I can't do it, staff is available to answer any questions you might have.
So would the projects that would be available for this funding be the ones that are in the 19 tip then?
Yes, they would be.
So only those projects that were approved
Well, it
for
could be
19 would be
could be the
available?
2018 and 19 tips.
That's a good question. That's one of the details that we would need to work out with this, is when would it start? When would it go into effect? I know we realize there's lots of, or some lead time is needed by community to get bond financing set up. So that would be something we'd want to work out and
Right.
hopefully get some input from city managers and finance directors at this meeting if we decide to move forward with it. That'd be helpful to us.
Would have to be projects that are approved in the tip,
Yes.
Yes,
not projects that we are now looking at doing.
right.
Going to be a one-time decision this year. We'll revisit this next year.
A lot of it depends on whether there are unobligated funds, whether we get great bid prices, continue construction, because we seem to be running a pattern of having a significant amount of year-end funds. Last year was about 2.6 million, and right now we're looking at close to 3 million. We won't have an exact total for probably another month or so, but
Might be too deep of a question, but are those funds freed up because we overestimated the projects and that's what freed it up, or is there projects that fell through? Do we know?
a little of both. Some projects people have not chosen to obligate and pulled the projects. Others, we've got great bids. The prices have come in lower than expected, so there's additional monies.
I myself, I would like to see if a city truly has a project and can move it up, I think it becomes to their advantage to do it. So it becomes an advantage to them and an advantage to us both.
Right.
I think it's a good idea on doing advanced funding if those cities can handle it.
Right. This could be tough for smaller communities, but hopefully with the interest rates they are now on temporary financing, that could be handled. We wanted to get your opinion to see if we wanted to move forward with this option, to get more details, go over it with your managers, clerks, and financial staff to see what their input is, and then we'll come back to you.
Only people that have projects pending in the TIP would be invited to that meeting because no one else really would have a say.
We'd like to, just in case we have to continue this program, we'd like for everybody to be there. We'll put that comprehensive invitation.
Another discussion could be around, and we're trying to confirm with KDOT and federal. We've got the famous North Junction interchange project, and that Wampo probably should be a part of that. And if we could use some of this money and as a policy body say that if we have excess money that we have trouble with projects, that we push that towards our participation on the North Junction. It's kind of a no-brainer on the regional significance, and anywhere from we're trying to check in if we could even start right-of-way acquisition and design, confirm on that, because we're also going to be a concerted effort to go into grant funding at the federal level, which will require local participation by communities and or along with MPOs. So I would like to consider that we as a policy body think that we could always have that as an option to consider while we're discussing individual city projects. I don't know how if the federal and state wants to weigh in on that as an option. Mike, you got a feeling, or Rick?
On the topic of AC specifically, well, I would just say that, in terms of our working relationship with KDOT, AC's been a pretty powerful tool in helping manage our cash, working with KDOT for example, when there's major projects that span multiple years, that AC allows, that allows them not to tie up all their obligational authority to be able to manage multiple projects. So AC is something that's been very successful in terms of a financial management tool between us, and if that's something that could be potentially used to help you all manage your cash flow, terrific. I don't know, Mike, do you want to add any comments?
That's pretty much what I would say. Advanced construction isn't hocus pocus. It might sound a little different in terms of the concept, but we use it on a daily basis projects. And if we're going through a time where we're cash heavy with state funds, we'll use state funds to pay for projects, build up that AC account. Then if we're lower on state funds, we can cash in with the feds and bring in those federal funds. So it's a very good cash management tool for us, particularly with, as Rick said, very large projects that may span multiple years.
And the reason why it's so helpful is because of the federal program being a reimbursement program. The state or the local has to pay first before they can be reimbursed. The AC helps with that management, so that when you convert from AC back to normal funding, you should have the cash in hand to be able to take care of that. So that's one of the benefits why so many states and localities are pleased to use it. So.
Thank you. Fantastic input. Yeah, Richard?
I'd be supportive of taking a look at this. I have a question though. You say it'd be hard for smaller cities and they might incur some debt cost. I mean, would it cause them to acquire some debt costs they wouldn't normally have? And if so, I guess I'm a little confused how that would work. I would have thought that giving the money forward would decrease that. Can you kind of clarify that?
Just the temporary note interest would be the only financing cost.
That they wouldn't have had before?
Not if they were reimbursed cash, or if they paid a portion of the cost and then we reimbursed them. Originally, they wouldn't have that temporary note interest cost. But right now, you're talking about 1.5 to 2% interest on short-term financing.
I think it'd be a case of a small city where the project wouldn't even be considered without the without the opportunity of having this ability to have this money. So I don't know that, and that's where it goes to Bruce's question. If it's already in the TIP, I mean, I could see where, there's things that we would do if the money's available. But if you have to be in a queue, then it doesn't affect anything that we'd be thinking of extraordinary.
Speaking from a small city perspective, it can be as much a lack of having, being nimble enough to move it up a year, to to get the connections with various council and your finance department put together to get it moved up through your capital improvements programming process and still be able to take advantage of the money this year rather than next year, or next year rather than the year after. For the most part, the cities are strong. The smaller cities are strong on their debt capacity. It's just that lack of nimbleness and that lack of staff capacity to make it happen quickly.
All right, is this good guidance, or we need to make a motion for direction, or?
I think unless there's something detrimental to the proposal, we'll just move ahead and
Yeah.
take to the next step and then come back to you again with kind of an update on what the meeting with the managers and clerks.
I would agree, unless there's some objection. I think everybody's happy with the progress, and thanks for the information. So, next item is Mr. Rick Backlund, our federal highway person. He's going to present a MPO 101.
So good to see you all. Apologies for being a few minutes late. But anyway, good to be back. And just to kind of give a little history about this presentation, Phil Nelson had invited me to present this to you all because we had, Paul Foundukas of my staff had made this presentation to our folks on the TAC, and was well received. So the thought was, we thought we would present this and kind of give a broad overview when we talk about an MPO, Metropolitan Planning Organization. What is it? What are we talking about? What's the focus? What's the intended focus of an MPO organization? Okay. So Becky, how do I do this? Okay. Okay, can you start that? Thanks. Okay, we've got a video here to kind of kick things off, so.
Transportation is the backbone of our communities. We rely on it every day to get us to work, to get us to shopping and recreation, and to bring us goods and services. But who makes the decisions about our transportation system? And how are those decisions made? This video is an introduction to metropolitan transportation planning and the role of metropolitan planning organizations. Over the last 100 years or more, America's population and lines of commerce have expanded well beyond the boundaries of individual cities and towns. Today, networks of highways, transit services, freight carriers, and airports serve metropolitan areas that may include many cities, suburbs, towns, and counties. In today's urban areas, many transportation decisions are best handled at the regional level. A regional approach gives decision makers a comprehensive understanding of transportation problems and the ability to develop comprehensive solutions. Over the years, Congress has promoted a regional approach to urban transportation planning and decision making. One of the most important advances came in the 1970s with legislation that required the creation of Metropolitan Planning Organizations, or MPOs, in areas with a population of 50,000 or more. Now, there are over 300 MPOs across the country. An MPO may be a freestanding planning organization or an association of local governments. But every MPO is governed by a policy board of local elected officials. The board may also include representatives from state transportation departments, mass transit operators, and others. The MPO is not alone in the decision-making process, but it's the engine that drives collaboration and cooperation among many participants. Local elected officials bring a unique perspective to the planning and decision-making process. They often face a challenging balancing act, making decisions that have the greatest regional benefit, while at the same time reflecting the concerns of the communities they represent. MPOs and their partners produce three key documents: the Unified Planning Work Program, the Transportation Plan, and the Transportation Improvement Program. The Unified Planning Work Program, or UPWP, describes the planning studies that are being performed for the metropolitan area. The Transportation Plan identifies the region's transportation policies, strategies, and projects for the next 20 years or more. The Transportation Improvement Program, or TIP, is a short-range program of projects covering at least 3 years that directs available funds to those improvements that are the highest priority. The MPO Policy Board and its partners direct the development and contents of the plan, the TIP and the UPWP. Both the plan and the TIP must be physically constrained, in other words, consistent with available and expected funds. In areas with air quality problems, the plan and the TIP must also help the region meet federal standards. Let's now look at how the plan and the TIP are prepared. Often, the local planning participants start with a regional vision or a set of goals. This vision expresses what the region would like to become, perhaps 40 or 50 years in the future.
Well, important elements of long-range plan are obviously in a strong statement of goals and values. What is it that we're after in the transportation system of the future?
In developing a vision or goals, the MPO may consider many questions. What are the trends in regional growth, and are they desirable? How well is the transportation system performing? Do existing plans deal with current and expected problems? Can the transportation system support the kinds of future development that the region desires? When the vision and goals are in place, the MPO and its partners are better able to identify transportation problems and needs. These can include declining mobility, increasing congestion, poor access to jobs and neighborhoods, unhealthy air, or inconsistency with proposed economic development. An understanding of these problems allows the MPO and its partners to identify alternatives to improve transportation. Alternatives may include new policies, operational strategies, or capital projects. Some may help the existing system work better. Others may expand or build new transit lines, highways, and other facilities. Another round of questions is asked in assessing the impact of alternatives. How well does each alternative address the region's transportation problems? What are the likely impacts on neighborhoods and the environment? How much do the alternatives cost? Are the funds there? And is this the best use of available resources? The answers to these questions help the board choose the best alternatives. By adopting the transportation plan, the board establishes the policies, strategies, and projects that the region will pursue. To develop the TIP, priority projects are drawn from the adopted transportation plan and matched with available funding. Once adopted by the MPO, the TIP is submitted to the state and becomes part of the statewide Transportation Improvement Program. But the process doesn't end here. Projects and strategies in the plan and TIP undergo further development, often including engineering and environmental studies. Also, many MPOs monitor the implementation of the plan and TIP, study how well the plan is working, and make periodic adjustments. Federal rules require that the plan be updated and readopted every
How do I back up? Oh, jeez, sorry. Can we move? I was trying to improve the volume. See if I can take this. Yeah, trying to see if we can get this.
areas, many transportation decisions are best handled at the regional level. A regional approach gives decision makers a comprehensive understanding of transportation problems and the ability to develop comprehensive solutions.
So it's loading. That's what's taking so long.
MPOs and their partners produce 3 key documents: the Unified Planning Work Program, the Transportation Plan, and the Transportation Improvement Program. The Unified Planning Work Program, or UPWP, describes the planning studies that are being performed for the metropolitan area.
Why don't we just... Okay, let's just move on. Sorry. Just love technology. That's why it's so great. Okay, let's just keep going here. All right, so when we talk about the MPO, who is the MPO? Let's take a look here. We've got the policy board. When we talk about metropolitan planning organizations, we have approximately 400 of them around the country. Basically, an MPO is the forum for effective decision making. The folks that come around the table, that get together to make the priorities for the region. That is the purpose of it. When you look at the federal regulations and you look at the background and the guidance, that's where we're coming from. But basically, it's the agency responsible for planning and programming regional transportation projects. So 400 around the country, as we saw in the video earlier. There are 2 types of MPOs based on population. Census population is for urbanized areas over 50,000 in population. That's the definition of how we define an MPO. So for small MPOs, those are over 50,000 in population, under 250,000. We are the next level, which is a transportation management organization, which is over 200,000 in population. The only real difference is that a TMA, as we are called, must have a documented congestion management process, and that TMAs are suballocating their surface transportation grant monies. Typical MPO organizations include a policy board, technical committees, and staff. It's very typical, similar to what we have here in Wampo. We have a transportation policy body and a technical advisory committee. The technical advisory committee is more your working level staff folks, and then the policy board is more the elected officials. You are the body that decides the priorities and makes the decisions on that. So when we do this forward, so when we talk about the planning process, there's a typical code that we use, or acronym that we use, is the 3C planning process. And this goes back to statute in Title 23. Comprehensive, continuing, and cooperative. An MPO is intended to be a dynamic organization, continually meeting, identifying the region's needs. As the video was talking about earlier, there are 3 key products. There's a Unified Planning Work Program, the Transportation Plan, which is really the bedrock over 20 years of the needs for the region, and then that 3 to 5 year Transportation Improvement Program, which is very specific. It gets into the prioritized projects and programs that are going to be advanced. They have to be financially constrained. They have to be prioritized. And that's all the work that you all do. But the 3C process is really the bedrock. The process is meant to be, when we talk about MPOs being a forum for effective decision making, that is the means of how we get to identifying the needs and how we bring them all together. When we look around the room here, this is very typical for MPOs around the country. We typically have state DOT at the table. Normally, Federal Highways, or FTA, is a non-voting, can be a non-voting advisory member, but it's basically your major jurisdictions. There is no set roadmap on how voting gets done. I mean, there are some basic minimums of the types of participants. With the FAST Act, we've also included transit operators, but how you all conduct your business in terms of organizing yourselves, there's quite a lot of flexibility in how that's done. MPOs have 6 core functions. Regional decision making is the big one. Evaluating transportation improvement options. When you're looking at a corridor, and you're doing a study to move forward. And we recently just had the scenario planning workshop where, and a lot of you all were there. You had a chance to kind of look at a corridor and get a sense of, for that, what are the types of future visions would you all have for that area? That's the type of visioning that can be brought back into a transportation plan and then ultimately into a program. But basically, it's looking at the needs. And based on those improvement options, based on corridor studies, scenario planning studies, the needs that you all bring to the table, that's where we come together. And I know that Wampo's working on their next plan update. And then from that is how we get our transportation improvement program. Identifying performance measures is something recent that's come in as a result of the FAST Act, and public involvement is key as well. So, when and where? Board and policy committee meetings, we don't define a set schedule of what those would be. Public outreach, that we have MPOs that do very intensive public outreach around the country. We have others that have it more on a regular based schedule. 4 positions back, I was in New York and I worked with the New York Metropolitan Transportation Council. This is one of the largest MPOs in the country. It is so big that they actually have 3 mini MPO organizations within it. They have New York City, they have Long Island, and they have the Southern Hudson Valley counties. And in each of those, what we call transportation coordinating committees, they're bodies where they meet, they determine the needs for those regions, they bring those needs into the greater body. That works for that region. For smaller MPOs, I've also worked with MPOs, for example, in Indiana. I remember one MPO, I'll age myself, going back to the early 90s, and this was back when we really didn't have a lot of requirements on plans. I visited this MPO and met with their one planner, and I asked to see their plan, and I was brought out an engineering map, and it literally had a map of the city, and it had markers that said, in this year we're going to widen this road, and in this year we're going to do some pavement resurfacing, and that was it. And I got to tell you, that was an eye-opener. So we've moved quite a ways from then. So as you've seen, and for those that have been involved in the planning field, we've moved quite a bit more into getting into the type of details that, if you're a member of the public, can you open that plan and get a sense of what the needs are for your region? If they live in a certain city within that area, can they get a sense of where the priorities are? How can they get involved? This is meant to be, when we talk about a 3C process, this is meant to be a participatory plan. This is meant to be public involvement. And when we do certification reviews, that's something we take very seriously. So why bother? This is what Paul wrote, and I think it's a great question. But when we talk about public money and some of the reasons as to why MPOs were created, it was meant to give the public that opportunity, especially for federally funded projects, that opportunity to see where their money is going, be involved, learn about the needs, bring their input in. Multi-jurisdictional coordination was intended, and is a key part of this. You all deal with this. I mean, coming here to the TPB meetings, you're always dealing with and talking about, if you've got cross-cutting needs, how do you best manage those corridors? And I think this came up well in the scenario planning workshop we just had. That was another example where we had an example of Omaha. We also had an example from Idaho. Very different size cities, and then you could add in, a large TMA, and then talk about, how they coordinate. So all of these are meant to be, how do we create informed decision making? When we talk about, let's say there's a certain corridor, and at the political level, the cities along that corridor want to make improvements. They're getting a lot of political pressure to advance a certain type of alternative. The planning process is meant to take a step back and make sure the public's involved, see if there's other alternatives. What about if politically they're looking to do primarily roadway enhancements? What are other options? Is transit a viable option? May not be. Are there other options? And as we've been going through this planning process now for almost 50 years, we now have the role of technology. So lots of things at play, but the bottom line is the purpose of an MPO is to be the forum for effective decision making. So when we talk about the 3C process, when we talk about MPOs being continuing, cooperative, and comprehensive, that's why you all meet regularly, because it's not just you create a plan, you go put it on the shelf, or you make a tip and you go put it on the shelf. The other third document that we're going to talk about is the Unified Planning Work Program. You all vote on that. That is the document that directs the MPO staff as to what the studies will be, how they're going to work on development of a plan, a tip, the other key priorities for your region. Some of your brethren MPOs around bordering Kansas, for example, the Mark MPO has they handle the MPO functions, but they're broader. I mean, they also include housing. They include other whole departments. Their organization is over 100 employees. So, and that around the country, it really depends. I'll give an example from California. The MPO for San Diego, where many local governments receive sales tax money, they actually they adopt the plans, they adopt the tips, and they go off and build it because they are the local government. So they are the linchpin for advancing transit lines, for freeways, for bus rapid transit. So again, the federal regulations are a framework, but they're not meant to be the end-all be-all. So when we talk about, let's get into the three key products. When we talk about long-range plans, typical 20-year forecast, it can be longer. It's really this is the basic minimum. Some MPOs around the country go for larger time frames. I have seen, related to transportation on the freight side, I have seen freight plans go out to 50 years that have the intensive involvement from the MPOs to get that basic background is when they're looking at needs. Multimodal, transit, highways, rail, especially now that we're advancing into stronger freight programs, freight rail, involvement in the Class 1 railroads, you could have them on the policy body. They could be voting members. There's nothing that says they can't. Again, this comes back to the fact that with the MPO being the forum, all that we're doing in federal regulation is setting a basic framework of parameters. It's your call who your member agencies are. All we do is mandate minimums. So there can be more involvement, more robust involvement as you all see fit. But basically, it's identifying transportation needs. You all are going through there right now with your transportation planning update, and then a fiscally constrained project list. The tip is, as the video was talking about, is updated every 4 years. Actually, the discussion we had about AC, I think, was well timed. It's a good example of what happens when you develop a tip. I can tell you that in my time with Federal Highways over the last 30 years and with the evolvement of financial and fiscal constraint, that has become much more of a key linchpin. And frankly, a lot of that was driven by the public. The public wanted to see that tips were realistic. They wanted to be able to see that the dollars or the projects that were in there were not political wish list projects, but they actually had feet. They were able to be built. They were going to be advanced. So what we have seen in the process over the last 2 decades is a real strengthening of those financial constraint provisions. And from US DOT's perspective, it's really key because, frankly, it comes back to the whole integrity of why we're doing planning. If we can't have financial constraint, if we can't have reasonably available sources of funding, then why are we doing this? So a lot of work, involvement's been happening. You're sitting here as part of an MPO, and I can tell you that there's been decades of involvement of how planning is being done. Again, the UP Unified Planning Work Program, this is a document that's updated annually, but this basically becomes the focus for example, for Wampo staff of what their priorities will be. You all have your part to play. You're the ones who decide what those priorities will be. And you're voting with your TAC, your Transportation Advisory Committee. You help to determine what corridors, what studies you're going to look at, and what those key products will be. There are requirements that come down with each new round of federal legislation. The latest is performance-based planning, target setting that come down at the national level. That also gets into the UPWP and the work that goes on. But basically, it serves as a scope of work. So getting back to the video, those three key products are what we're touching base on, the long-range plan, the TIP, and the UPWP. So basically, this is meant to be just a brief little session here, but it really gets back to being good decision makers and being cooperative, listening to all the needs. No need is, there may be folks that hear a need that they don't think is realistic, but the point of why we're MPOs, or why we have MPOs and why we have these bodies, is to allow that opportunity for comment. There may be ideas that folks have not considered, and the purpose of having these continuing cooperative processes, 400 of them around the country, is to allow that dialogue to happen so that we're making the best decisions we can with the federal dollars. Many MPOs around the country have, in fact, strengthened them. There's state requirements that will do that, or local. And the intent of this is basically that MPO bodies, we really are serious when we talk about the need for MPOs to really have effective dialogue. We are basically, we are not, if an MPO is only rubber stamping what the local needs are, or as I call it, stapling together a document, in other words, they meet to just bless what everyone's needs are for stated and there's no real dialogue, that's not what we're intending. The intent of an MPO is to have everyone bring their needs in. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about how can we take care of the needs that are there. Perhaps there are ways to group the needs to make a better decision. So, and this is kind of just a wrap up here, but basically, I think this is a great slide. By going through this process, the purpose of this, and when we have the meetings, is I know that the employees here and other speakers come in, they bring information for your consideration, because you're the ones that actually are the MPO. You're the ones that make the decisions for your public. So apologies on the video technical issues, but any questions for me or thoughts about MPOs?
Rick, the seminar we had, I'm sorry, I was kind of in and out, but the parts I was at was very, very good. It was neat to see Omaha, what they were doing in Idaho, and just their terrain as well in Omaha, with how they have their green spaces for flooding and what's their development, but a lot of stuff. Anyways, very good. So in your observation, so you mentioned.
Yeah,
Is the way
I mean,
our-
I've worked in 6 states in planning over the
Is
course
our
of my career.
MPO kind of fit our region? Would we?
I think it
Putting you on the
does.
spot.
I think sometimes I'll be honest. I think sometimes there's some comments that are made in some of our meetings that some folks might say, "Oh, I didn't ever think of it that way," and I think especially in the Midwest, if I might say it that way, I think there's a reluctance to sometimes throw those needs out there more than you'd find in other parts of the country. But it's a good thing. And, and also if an MPO's heading in a certain direction, this is the opportunity to hear if folks have a contrary opinion. That's good. I mean, we want to hear those, because the purpose of when we talk about a 3C process and being a forum for effective decision making, that's frankly battle testing a decision before you go out. Before a project goes out to the public, has it really been vetted? Has it been vetted to really look at all considerations? Are there other types of projects that maybe you as a group haven't thought about? I've seen that around the country where a member of the public will come in with an idea and it kind of looks like it's coming out of outer space. And you're like, huh? And then folks will talk about it. They'll come up at a meeting, they'll go off, they'll mull it over, they'll come back to the next policy board meeting or next TAC meeting, and they'll say, hey, that idea, we hadn't thought about that for that corridor. And then they'll talk about it. And then let's get some more data on this. I mean, maybe this is something that's legitimate. And I've seen things, get feed and move along and actually become real projects. So there is value added. I think there's for some MPOs, the public involvement process sometimes is a little bit downplayed, and I think that's a disservice because I think those public comments are really valuable input. And the more that you can do that, for example, if you're doing scenario planning, like we just had this workshop, charrettes, getting the public in, putting the tables out there, putting sheets of paper, getting their input, that's valuable stuff. And if that can come back and help, you all get a better sense of what your public's looking for, as well as your electeds and as well as the politics, that's where you all do the juggling and the dance to figure out, what gets put on the paper. So, yeah.
Public input is okay?
It's valued.
Perfect. Did I hear the word neighborhoods someplace in that video that
Absolutely. Absolutely. Anything else?
Any other questions?
And I'm around through the end of the meeting and after, so.
That was good. Thanks, Rick, for the presentation. All right, moving on to July is the month that we've had traditionally, and it might even be in the bylaws for elections. And so that is our next agenda item, election of a chairperson and vice chairperson. And so I open the floor for comments, suggestions, nominations. Yeah, Tom.
Done a fine job, but you got somebody who's been running in the shadows for a couple of years and has worked on the tax. I'd like to nominate Dan Lozak.
Okay. As the chair?
It's just change.
Okay.
I have a
James.
I have a little bit of a concern. We've got quite a bit of transition going on right now within the organization. We've got quite an extensive audit coming up. We've got elections of several people in this room that are going to be happening, and I want to float the idea that we consider holding off on elections until January, until after the local elections, to see what happens. If we get in the middle of this, there could be a little bit of a shakeup even on this body, but it's a suggestion I want to throw out there. I think it warrants some discussion, especially after some of the audit talk that's been happening. So,
Why don't you get the microphone so we can hear?
We've worked through that before. We had the same thing happen to a county commissioner several. And whoever's elected vice chair, if the chair is not there anymore, takes over. So I understand there's a lot of transition going on. We want to change our bylaws, and we don't do that today, or?
I'm not suggesting necessarily a bylaw change, although I think that it's difficult on an organization, and I'm not talking about a bylaw change necessarily today, but I think we need to think about the cycle of which we elect our officers, matching the cycle of our elections. So that's just my only point, and I'm
Good
opening it up for
discussion.
discussion. I'm not,
Right. I hear you.
not pushing anything. Just
Our bylaws require us to do.
Bill, can you?
You're supposed to hold elections in July for chair and vice chair.
And we can review bylaw change for future ones.
Bill, is there a method for overriding bylaws on a temporary basis in the bylaws?
Would ask Austin to address that.
There's a provision under the bylaws that allows for formal amendment Article 10, and that requires a notice of the amendment at least 5 calendar days in advance of the meeting where the proposed change would occur. So that would go out in a regular agenda. However, if we're doing an informal amendment to the bylaws are like a organizational operation compact. They're not our articles of incorporation. They're rules by which we govern our regular operations, and there's nothing formally that prevents us from taking a unified action to suspend the application of the bylaws on a temporary basis. That's because they're different than like a codification, like an ordinance. If we were at a city and we had an ordinance that was in place, that's a local law. Think of bylaws and the way that we operate, particularly because of our quasi-governmental status as a type of municipality. Think of bylaws much more like a resolution than an ordinance. Okay, if they were articles of incorporation or articles of organization, they would definitely have to be something that we follow directly. But in this case, I think on this type of an issue, you could, by vote of the governing body, make an exception. The bylaws do require a 2/3 vote if you're going to amend the bylaws. Here, a simple majority probably works because you're taking a formal action and you're not formally amending the bylaws. You're temporarily suspending their application for an individual action. With that, I'll stand for questions.
I've got a comment. Everybody on this board, except for KDOT and Federal Highways, could get replaced next month by the organizations that we support. So I mean, just because we got elections coming up in the fall don't mean that we shouldn't do what we're doing in July. We either need to change the date and the bylaws or have an election. So
I completely understand what you're saying. The formal procedure, if we're going to change bylaws, we probably put it on the next month's agenda, have the proposed change out there. Quite frankly, we've got bylaws that say one thing right now, but if you're going to temporarily suspend their application without making a formal change, I think that's a majority vote. So it's up to the governing body which direction they wish to go. Any other questions of legal? Yes, sir.
Yeah, I don't know that everybody realizes you have elections every year. Every November there's an election, and some people in this body are up for re-election every year.
Yes, sir.
Some are on the state elections, some are on the
Appreciate it. Thank you, sir. Anything else for legal?
Based on that, and I was actually along, irregardless of what we decide today, since there has been a change in state law, so now city are elected at the fall and take over in January, we do probably need to amend the bylaws at the proper time and make it February. Because most of us will take office in the first or second week of January, probably prior or maybe not before the January meeting of Wampo. So as we go forward and discuss it, whether you do a temporary or not, it really isn't relevant to this comment. We do need to amend them to get on that voting cycle again, like we have elections every year. But if we're elected in November, we take office in January, it won't affect the policy change in this for us, or policy board leadership in this board. So it's something we need to do.
I understand what Jim's saying over here, but right now we have a policy in place, and do we change that today, or do we do that in January? Do we have an election day and then change it sometime during the next year? I don't know.
No, I think, and I can't see this gentleman over here. That's my whole point. You know, we have the potential for I understand that we're gonna have shakeups once in a while. That happens, but every year, at the same time, we're gonna have elections, and if it just continuity is important. I think most of our local governments. I don't know if you have a hard time finding people for these positions, but I know some of the smaller towns and the SCAC has a hard time finding people for this position. And so just for continuity, that's just wanted to have the discussion.
I can offer one thing. You know, when we change this, then there's going to have to be this gap at some point, unless you just change your leadership today and then we come back and change the format of this, and then come back in January and reelect again. I mean, that's obviously what could happen, or like in the case of some of us, we're serving a 4.5, almost 5-year term just because of the way it happened. So I think as I listen to this, obviously the January cycle is necessary just because everyone then is there, and whoever gets nominated ought to be in their cycle where they're at least going to be a member of this board for a year and not involved in an election. But I would think what you'd do is have an action today unless the current chairman and vice chairman objects, potentially leave them in place till January, extend them whether they come dragging or not, and then formally change the bylaws and then have elections in January to start off that cycle. Or if it's going to be a case of we can't do that in a midstream meeting, you can elect your new chairman and vice chairman with the idea that they may only serve till January. So from a continuity perspective,
Yeah, and if that is the desire of the transportation policy body to leave things in place, there could be a formal motion made to suspend the election of a chair and vice chair for the body until January of next year, and request that the attorney bring back a formal change, a proposed change to the bylaws, leaving the officers in place until their successors are appointed in January, and move to that cycle if that's the desire.
David?
I guess I don't share Councilman Clendenin's concern about the continuity from the fact that actually the person who was nominated has been the vice chair for a number of years, does have the continuity. I understand that both the chair and the vice chair are up for election, and either one of them could be replaced, but so keeping the current chair doesn't, since he's up for election, I don't doubt that he won't be elected to the office he's running for, but there's always that possibility. So if we're worried about continuity, I don't know that it really carries much water.
Well, continuity wasn't necessarily just for this election. I think we need to have a sense of continuity every year at the same time, election time wise. What the body does today is what the body does today. If everybody wants to elect officers today, I'm fine with that. I just wanted to have the discussion based around, we need to have some time to think about whether or not we want to change our elections to January and have them be effective February or whatever. So I'm not trying to throw a curveball here.
Yeah, I would agree that when we're saying January, I think really what Dan referred to, there has been a change in state election policy. People take office in January, so probably February we should be saying the word February instead of January for a bylaw change.
And I don't want to really
agree.
throw another wrench in it, but after the elections next January, whoever is the chair of Sedgwick County will appoint the members of Wampo at that time.
Right. Yeah.
So,
and mayors and whatever do that. Yeah, you're right.
I can't guarantee who's going to be the chair, and I can't guarantee who's going to be the representatives from Sedgwick County at that time. So if we're worried about that now, I think it's not a worry that we ought to be considering.
I don't think I'm worried. I think every year there's that chance that if wholesale changes are going to be made to this body, it's better that the chance that those wholesale changes are going to happen are on the same time every year in consistent with our election cycle. So what happens today, I have no heartburn with. I just felt like this warranted a discussion right now. If the body decides it's great the way it is, the body decides it's great the way it is. So.
Oh, you want to say something?
I may as well. Keep it. I don't agree with, I agree with most everything that's been said, but for keeping things simple, we should, according to our rules, move forward with an election now. We already have a motion, although it's not been seconded, a motion for chairman, but move forward with election today. Have the chairman possibly appoint a bylaws committee to not just look at this, but see if there's any additional bylaws changes that may be affected by something that we need to look at. Come back to our board at the proper time where we could actually amend our bylaws and look at having, a chairman's vote again for a new chairman in, say, February or whatever the bylaws committee comes back for recommendations. So I think we should keep it clean today and elect as we're supposed to, appoint a bylaws committee, and come back and make whatever we decide at that point.
Well said. I don't have a really strong feeling either way, other than I do think moving eventually to the February and the bylaws West that you just mentioned, Kelly, would be healthy for the body, for the Wampo group. So if we have an election today, there's been a motion for a chair.
I will second that motion.
Okay, and Bert will second it. Yes.
Mr. Chairman, just one
Mr.
more
Chairman.
question. So if someone is appointed to the board and they are subsequently not reelected and someone is taking their place in their elected position in January, then who comes to the meeting in January? The one that lost their election won't be here, obviously, and
Right.
and the new person wouldn't be appointed yet, so.
Exactly. It's whoever's appointed, if it's a municipality, however they determine, a mayor appoints the person, or same with in our case, it's the city, and then in the county, as David said, the chair appoints their people.
Yes.
So the new person, if it's a new person comes in, then they get to learn this all, as we all
Jim,
have.
Is Jim asking about who comes to the meeting, or are you asking who
just-
chairs the meeting?
I'm just saying, well, for example, Pete, you're gonna be our commissioner next January. Who's chairing the meeting in January? If you were in this position, okay, then who would be here in January to chair the meeting? I assume the vice chair would have to do it in that case. And I know that I'm fine with voting on this right now, this is fine, but just as a thing in the back of my head, I almost feel like the elections ought to stay in the middle of the year, because this is the most stable time of the year. If someone's seat is vacated, that governing board will replace them at that appropriate time, whenever that happens.
Good point. Well, that could
Thank
be part of the discussion for the consideration of bylaw
Yeah,
changes. Yeah, I would
Thank you.
agree. I would agree.
Didn't mean to
Okay,
start a grandfather.
that's all right. Tom, there's been right, we're good.
Considering this now, so I apologize. I really didn't mean to throw a wrench or.
Oh, it's all right.
It's good.
It's good. Healthy stuff.
Start needing to thinking about.
All right, there's a motion and a second for the chair. Is there other motions for any other nominees? Being none, is there any discussion before we go to a vote? Okay, being none, all in favor of, we'll try a voice vote first. So, so all in favor of Dan Wojak being the new chair, effective whenever, right now, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Aye.
One opposition? All right. So, congratulations, Dan, you're the new chair. All right.
You gonna finish out the meeting, or you wanna?
You want me to finish?
He was already out of his chair.
That's fine.
We've been a good team before.
Yeah.
Wait, go ahead.
We can go ahead and then we need to entertain a motion for the vice chair.
I'd make a motion for David Dennis.
David Dennis has been nominated. Is there any other nominations or a second for that?
Second.
Second by Bruce. Okay. Any other nominations? If not, vice chair, those in favor of David Dennis for vice chair, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Executive committee update. Pete, I'm gonna let you run with this since you ran that meeting.
Okay, we did have an executive meeting. Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, we had an executive meeting, covered a couple of things, personnel updates, and an org chart, current org chart, because there had been some pretty good changes with staff recently. We discussed a little bit of things about our grant applications, mainly the build grant, which is the community, I think the county, Sedgwick County and Wichita are sponsoring the build grant application for the North Junction. And Wichita, at the city council this morning, we approved $500,000 towards that participation. And I believe it's agenda item tomorrow for the county.
We have an agenda item tomorrow to approve it for the county, hopefully.
Well, if that's approved, then the city of Wichita and Sedgwick County will be contributing $1 million towards this project, and we hope that we get encouraging from our friends at KDOT, and then we hope that we'd have a successful build application as we go into the future. Probably about as most regionally significant item we could have in our Wampo region.
The money is to be spent how? I mean, you approved 500,000, is it just,
Well, there's a combination of design and there's going to be right-of-way purchases going on too. But it's very important. Gary, can you confirm we need to get the design to a level where call it? Yeah, that's fine. Please.
Gary Jansen, city engineer, city of Wichita. I might just kind of tell everybody where we're at. So if the county commissioners approve the same tomorrow, there's going to be $1 million. We have an agreement between the two agencies. Kind of details who's going to do what. We've hired professional engineering consultants who's currently doing the design work for KDOT. At this point, they're only planning on going to field check level design, which is 50% plans, which is good. That's better than where it was at. Our $1 million would be for professional services to help prepare a grant application for the build grant, which is due July 19th. That's the former Tiger grant. It's also to start buying right-of-way. The city would undertake that. And again, we'd have PEC on board. There's some professional services costs there to develop what's needed, tract maps, legal descriptions, things like that to purchase right-of-way. But this is a joint venture between the city and the county. The application is a joint application between the city and the county. Even if we are not successful on the grant application, we think buying the right-of-way now does a lot to get the project moving forward. One of the big parts of these types of federal grant applications is project readiness, moving things forward, showing that there's a local commitment to make things happen. We expect later this year that there will be a notice of funding for the infra grant, which is probably more significant for this type of project. It offers a potential for more cost to be covered, available funding. We would have everything ready to go effectively with what we've already done for this first application to be ready to go to the second one. So all of that plays into the $1 million. The biggest part of that is to start buying right-of-way.
Gary, this is phase 2 and 3.
So the green phase is actually going to be bid for construction in January, which is basically everything from the west side, from Broadway to past Seneca. It does some widening, replaces bridges that are in bad condition. It doesn't do a lot for any of the traffic congestion, the issues currently in the heart of the North Junction, but it does a lot to help construction in the future and accommodate when those changes are made. What we're working on now, looking at, is the Gold Project. That's what KDOT's designing to 50%. That would take care of really the majority of the problems that you see now during the AM and the PM peak hours. Phase 3, the future phase, which is the purple phase, would be farther out, quite a bit more cost. There'd be some more right away with that, but our focus right now would be on this gold phase as phase 2.
Thanks.
Make sure that I understand what we're voting on tomorrow. Phase 1, when we went up to Topeka earlier this year, phase 1, KDOT said that they're going to start working that. but it does not do anything to really alleviate the congestion at the North Junction. It just
Correct.
sets everything up to be able to go into the next phase.
Yes.
What we're looking at with this grant is phases 2 and 3, isn't it?
It's just phase 2 right now on the gold project. The gold is two parts of it, and so let me clarify. There had been gold and orange. They use these colors. That's been combined now into one phase for gold. So that actually would have been phase 2 and 3 combined. Phase 4, the way this used to be at one time, would be the final purple phase. The gold and orange combined into the gold phase now will take care of the majority of the problems up there. Thank you. Sorry I didn't clarify that better. Yes, sir.
Just continuing that, so what's the estimate for these different phases in terms of cost? Do we have any idea what magnitude how many millions of dollars each one of these phases is gonna cost?
So the green phase that we'll bid in January, I think is somewhere around $70 million. Construction estimate for the gold phase is around 80. Total project cost is about $100 million by the time you look at design and right-of-way and everything that goes into that. And then I'm not sure about the purple, Mike. I don't
it's
recall
similar.
what that number is.
It's similar to the gold phase.
The right-of-way that's gonna be purchased is for the gold phase? Or for the
So
green phase?
the estimated right-of-way for the gold phase right now is around $10 million.
So but the $1 million, whatever money is gonna be used for purchasing right-of-way, is it purchasing right-of-way for the green phase or for the gold phase?
The gold phase. All the right-of-way is in place for the green phase. It is ready to bid in January. The right-of-way we're looking at now is for the gold phase only.
Okay, just a, I guess a side comment here. On the northwest bypass, I guess in the county, we developed what's called an overlay, which prohibits development in that area that we might want to purchase in the future. We don't have the money to buy the right of way, all of it right now, but we'd like to make sure that down the road, someone doesn't develop something in an area that we know is going to be a problem. So there ought to be an overlay that protects a certain part of that land so that when the right of way purchases are going to happen, we're not making things more complicated by not at least putting some type of a protective overlay in place right now. And part of my, out of the $1 million, how much of that money do you think will be available for purchasing right of way? Half that, or?
No, based on our costs right now for professional services, to prepare the grant application, to get ready to buy right-of-way, we would still have $800,000 for right-of-way.
Okay. And so that's $800,000 out of 10 million.
Estimated 10 million, yes, sir.
We got to buy 10, and that's most likely going to be the local match money for this project will be the balance of that 10
Not
million?
necessarily. Kind of depends. So on these federal grants, the more you can contribute on the local match, the better your chances are of getting the grant. There's not a magic number. It typically starts at 20% as the minimum local match. So looking at an $80 million construction cost, that's $16 million local match. There would need to be more than just the right-of-way if it's only $10 million.
And when do we think that the gold phase, if everything was wonderful and utopian, when would the gold phase begin, you think? What's the earliest you would expect that to happen?
If we happen to get lucky enough to get the build grant funding, we have to be under construction by the fall of 2020.
And how long does it take to purchase right of way?
Well, bear with me here, I'll tell you, the first answer is if we happen to be lucky enough to get build funding, we'll purchase the right of way by the summer of 2020. We have to.
Right.
Or we lose the funding. The infra funding, the grant I talked about, is probably a little bit more of an achievable schedule. It puts us in late 2022 starting the project, gives us more time to buy right away and more time to be prepared. That doesn't mean that can't happen with the build grant. It would just expedite everything that we're doing and put us in a spot where we'd have to do everything a lot quicker.
So once again, how long does it, so between now and the fall of 2020 or fall of 2022, that's how long it takes to purchase all the right of way? We'll use up that entire amount of time
Well,
to do
we
that.
probably would end up using most of that time. The reason being, there are some full acquisitions on this project, particularly on the west side of the current alignment, that would require relocation of businesses. The more time you can allow that to happen, the less cost you end up paying and the less impact you have to those businesses. That doesn't mean it can't be done quicker, but it ends up ultimately costing more is the biggest impact. So we can stretch it out. If we have more time to stretch it out, we would stretch it out to allow those businesses more time to find a suitable place to go, which ultimately costs less money.
I look forward to the discussion tomorrow, and I'll be thinking about this from now to then, of course, but I guess I'd like to have more discussion about the protective overlay. I think that's an important part of this. And as far as I know, no one's talking about that yet, so that needs to be part of the discussion.
I would mention one thing on that real quick, and I don't know about anybody else's attorneys, but I'll tell you what we've looked at on our side. Most of these properties where we need right-of-way are already developed now. A few of them are not. They can make changes. There's not much you can do about that. City of Wichita has had the unfortunate opportunity over the last several years to approach property owners about future projects effectively in the manner which you discussed. And on two of those, one of them is settled. One of them we are currently going to court on an inverse condemnation claim, saying that we irrevocably damaged the property by effectively trying to put an overlay on the property, just so you know. So from the city standpoint, we would be a little bit cautious to take that approach. Because what happens, in short, is we go out and talk to property owners saying, hey, we really want to do something here in the future. This is the right of way we might need. Those property owners have the right under law, as hard as it is to believe, to be able to get an attorney and take us to court and say, well, now I can never do anything with my property ever again because I'm under this cloud that you may do something in the future. I can't market my property. I can't sell it. And they could force us into compensating them for that, and we get nothing out of it. So we're really cautious to take that approach for that reason. I wish it wasn't that way. It's the world we live in, and it's something that we've been pushed into taking a different look on how we do that now.
I can tell you that the state of Kansas used to have a statute in the books that had an exclusive set aside, and you could not develop in those types of zones, and it was ruled unconstitutional and taken out of the statute book. So
Okay.
basically because of what Gary just said.
Gary, you gonna be at the meeting tomorrow, or does
I
Jim know
do
everything
plan to be
about
at the meeting tomorrow, if you don't mind. I was just going to sit in the back regardless.
Okay. Thank you.
That pretty much was the executive meeting.
Okay, TAC, Tom?
TAC, we had Paul do the presentation that Richard did today. Other than that, everything was on the agenda. I'd like to thank Pete for everything he's done the last couple of years.
All right, partnership development reports. Tom?
I'd like to talk about another regionally significant project. That'd be the I-235 US 54 interchange, of course, my constant harping project. As you know, this is a 3.5-year project. It started in November of 2015, and it will end next year, thank goodness. There are 8 ramps at that interchange, and we are affecting 6 of those. And 3 of them are closed right now, and the reconstruction is ongoing right now, and those will open this fall. So then we are getting very close to being finished, which could finish a little early next year, but it's scheduled for the summer of 2019. So this fall, we will see northbound 235 to westbound Kellogg open. We will see eastbound US 54 to northbound 235 open. We will see westbound US 54 to northbound 235 open. So that will be a good day this fall if it all comes on the same day, which anyway, good news coming on that project. It's making good progress, and it is slightly ahead of schedule.
Thank you. Michael?
All right, thank you. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Misters Chairpersons, incoming and outgoing. I have a report on a statewide significant project, that being the Joint Transportation Task Force. I think most of us probably know the legislature and governor have established the joint statewide transportation task force to take a look at all things transportation here in Kansas. They're going to meet over the next several months. I believe their final report has to be in place by January of 19. I did want to report to the group that at this time, the co-chairs of that committee are engaging with various organizations in planning dates and venues for the meetings. No dates have been set yet at this time. However, we do expect to see 8 meetings statewide, one here in Wichita, one in Kansas City, and then 6 more in the different KDOT regions here in Kansas. So we hope to have more information for this group as that process starts to take shape.
Okay, thank you. All right, Richard, have anything else for us?
Oh, yes, I have a couple things to report. First off, I had the chance to come down for the scenario planning workshop. Just want to say I know that there was good turnout from the policy board and the attendees. I just received an email today from Rachel Strauss that had talked about the feedback, and they had the survey comments. Sound like a lot of you got a lot out of it. They were very favorable. And I think it was a very good question that a lot of you all raised in your comments is what's next. So, and I think that's something that for Wampo to consider, now that we've seen some approaches from around the country. I do want to especially thank Wampo. I know that Chris Upchurch and others worked very hard with Volpe to create a workshop that was relevant, that when we brought MPOs in, that they weren't coming from, not disparaging any particular MPO, but, Los Angeles, New York, Portland, Oregon, is that relatable? And I think that, the comments I heard from you all is from the reports, having Omaha participate, I think was really value added, as well as Idaho. So good stuff. And I know we'll be listening to hear what Wampo wants to do next in terms of taking some of those ideas. We've hired we're in the process of bringing on some new folks in our division office. We have just brought on an environmental specialist that is coming from Kansas Department of Health and Environment, very involved in air quality. So air quality monitoring. His name is Javier Ahumada. He was chief of their air quality compliance unit. So he's bringing to us some strong experience for some potential projects we're going to be advancing, but also on the air quality conformity side as we move forward. So he has just started. We're also filling a position on our performance management side, and I know Wampo's involved from the planning side, but we're soon to be able to make an announcement, and we're looking to that position to be coming on board at the end of July. The state submitted their transportation asset management initial plan back on April 30th, and we are reviewing the plan. Looking very good. The review is very favorable, and we hope to make a decision soon. And I know that with Wampo, you all have been also involved in asset management, so just wanted to provide an update. The other thing I wanted to mention is Everyday Counts initiative. We have a statewide transportation innovation committee, and we have recently we had a summit 2 years ago in Minneapolis where Phil, you attended, as well as Mark. We have an innovation committee in each state does that talks about, what types of EDC initiatives can we advance, and I know we've extended an invite to Wampo to start participating regularly in those stick meetings, as well as Mark, so that is coming up. We will be having a summit for the next round of EDC, and I wanted to just briefly mention a couple of these that might be of interest. But this summit's going to be at the end of October in St. Louis, and I know we will be inviting Wampo to send a representative. But some of the innovations that they're looking, safe transportation for pedestrians, the STEP program is going to be part of the focus area. Drones. So, and I know that there's a lot of aerospace industry here. There might be some potential good things coming out of that. Virtual public involvement. How do we take advantage and harness the internet and bring folks in and have that? The weather responsive strategies will be another one. We talk about climate resilience for our infrastructure. And then bundling of projects. When you have, like, for example, state or locality, you've got a number of projects. Are there innovative ways to do it? So anyway, long story short, this is coming up. The summit will be at the end of October in St. Louis. So Wampo will be invited for that. And in terms of key position fillings, for our administrator, we're still waiting to get a nomination. Brandy Hendrickson is still in the acting role, and that's going to be that way for the foreseeable future. But we have been filling some of the other positions. The head of NHTSA was filled with a career person, Heidi Peterson, most recently. So any questions for me?
Other business?
Hey, Dan, just let me say that it's been an honor to serve, and every chairperson has their own style. Mine has been one that, as you notice, I use first names when I call on you, Jim, Bert, everybody. I don't say mayor or somebody, but it's whatever Dan's preference will be. And so I've never meant any disrespect by not addressing you as your title, just using your first name mostly. But that was just, you've all got your own protocol, how you do your own meetings, and it's been an honor to serve and get to know you each personally and individually. And I think we're in a good place to make some progress. So,
Thank you. We do
Yep, thank
appreciate
you.
your serving.
Yep.
Anything else? Adjourned.